Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are going to completely rethink everything we think we know about money, time, and happiness. We're diving deep into the data, the psychology, and the history behind why we work so incredibly hard. And we're going to ask a really fundamental question. What does it genuinely mean to be wealthy in the modern world? Because as you'll see, it's not just about the numbers sitting in your bank account. It's about something way more profound.
Let's just jump right in with this quote. The highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up every morning and say, I can do whatever I want today. Now, this hits on a massive paradox in our modern society, right? We all want to get wealthier because, well, we believe it'll make us happier. But in that relentless, everyday pursuit of money, we so often end up sacrificing the exact freedom that brings us joy in the first place. We literally trade our time for dollars, just hoping to one day buy back our time. It's a fascinating trap.
All right, Section 1, the universal fuel of joy, defining the common denominator of happiness. Let's talk about the fascinating work of Angus Campbell. He was a psychologist at the University of Michigan. Now, back in his day, psychology was overwhelmingly focused on clinical disorders, things that brought people down, like anxiety or depression. But Campbell, he wanted to figure out what actually made people happy. So in his 1981 book, The Sense of Well-Being in America, he really dug into the data. And he found you couldn't just group happy people by income or geography or education. There were plenty of rich, highly educated people who were chronically miserable. Instead, he discovered that the absolute most dependable predictor of positive well-being was a strong sense of controlling one's own life. Not your salary, not the square footage of your house, not your fancy job title. The universal fuel of joy, the real secret sauce, is simply having control over your own time. So money's greatest intrinsic value is actually its ability to buy you that control. Think of it kind of like a ladder of unspent assets. If you have just a small amount of wealth saved up, it means you can take a sick day without stressing out about breaking the bank. That's step one. A bit more money? Well, if you get laid off, you can afford to wait for a genuinely good job rather than desperately taking the absolute first one that comes along. At step 3, with 6 months of emergency expenses, you're literally no longer terrified of your boss. Step 4 means you can afford to take a job with lower pay simply because it gives you flexible hours or maybe a shorter commute. And finally, step 5 is retiring exactly when you want to, instead of when you're forced to. Every single increment of unspent money is basically buying you a piece of your autonomy back.
Moving on to Section 2, the price of reactance, when high pay meets zero control. The author of our source text tells this wild story about wanting to be an investment banker back in college for one very simple reason. They made a ton of money. So they landed this ultra-prestigious summer internship in Los Angeles, and man, they felt like they'd won the career lottery. On paper, it was the absolute dream. It paid incredibly well, it was intellectually stimulating, and it just felt important. But on day one, reality hit hard. The office rule was literally, if you don't come to work on Saturday, don't bother coming back on Sunday. Going home before midnight was considered a luxury. Every waking second belonged to the boss. The internship was supposed to last 4 months. They only survived one absolutely miserable month.
So, we have to ask, why exactly was that internship so completely miserable? Here's the twist. The author actually loved the work itself and genuinely wanted to work hard. But doing something you love on a schedule you have zero control over feels exactly the same as doing something you completely hate. Psychologists actually have a word for this. They call it reactance. Jonah Berger, a marketing professor at the University of Pennsylvania, points out that people have a deep need to feel like they are in the driver's seat of their own lives. The second we're forced to do something, we feel disempowered and we push back. We resist it, even if it's an activity we originally would have happily chosen to do on our own.
Now, let's contrast that miserable, high-earning intern with successful entrepreneur Derek Sivers. Sivers worked a day job in Manhattan that paid barely minimum wage. We're talking about $20,000 a year. But he lived unbelievably frugally. He never ate out, he never took a taxi, and he kept his total living expenses down to just $1,000 a month. Over 2 years, he managed to save up $12,000. And at age 22, he realized that $12,000 gave him just enough runway to quit his job, play a few music gigs a month to cover his basic costs, and be entirely free. Now, when people ask Sivers about when he got rich, they almost always expect him to talk about the day he sold his massive company for millions. But Sivers says no way. The millions in the bank didn't change his day-to-day life. He says he became truly wealthy at 22 because that was the day he bought his freedom.
Section 3, the modern wealth paradox, richer but unhappier. Get this. The United States is literally the richest nation in the history of the world. But according to a massive 2019 Gallup poll across 140 countries, when people were asked if they experienced a lot of worry the previous day, 45% of Americans said yes. The global average was only 39%. So despite all our unprecedented, historic economic wealth, Americans are significantly more worried than the rest of the entire planet.
And this paradox gets even crazier when we look at daily stress. In that exact same poll, a staggering 55% of Americans reported feeling a lot of stress the previous day. The global average, just 35%. That is a massive 20-point gap. We are so much wealthier, yet we're incredibly stressed out and worried. Why is that?
Well, the answer lies in how our lives have scaled up over the years. If you adjust for inflation, between 1955 and 2019, the median family income basically doubled, jumping from around $29,000 to over $62,000. And our homes absolutely exploded in size, going from under 1,000 square feet to over 2,400 square feet. The average new American home today literally has more bathrooms than people living in it. Our TVs are sharper, our cars are way faster. We've used our massive increase in wealth to buy bigger, better stuff. But the catch, the real paradox here, is that in doing all of that, we inadvertently traded away the control over our time. And as we learned earlier from Angus Campbell, if you don't have control over your time, all the fancy stuff in the world just isn't going to make you happy.
Which brings us to Section 4, the never-ending shift, why we feel like we're working 24/7.
Think about John D. Rockefeller for a second. He's one of the most successful businessmen in history. But he was famously a recluse. A refinery worker actually once noted that Rockefeller would just let everyone else do the talking while he sat back and said absolutely nothing. When people asked him about his silence, Rockefeller would recite this little poem about a wise old owl who listened more than he spoke. Why? Well, because Rockefeller realized something completely revolutionary for his time. His actual job wasn't to physically load trains or haul oil barrels. His deliverable product was what he figured out inside his own head. So he spent his days just quietly sitting and thinking through complex problems.
Now, Rockefeller's thought-based job was a total anomaly back then, but it is entirely the norm today. As economist Robert Gordon pointed out, back in 1870, nearly half of all jobs were in agriculture, and another 35% were in crafts or manufacturing. You labored physically. You didn't really need to think it through. You just did the manual work. Today, that is completely flipped. Nearly 80% of jobs are now designated as managers, professionals, or service roles. These are decision-making, thought-based jobs. And this is a monumental shift. Because, look, if you build cars on an assembly line, when your shift ends, you leave your tools at the factory and you go home. But if your job is to design a marketing campaign, or write code, or manage a team, your main tool is your brain. And your brain never actually leaves the office.
And that creates the ultimate trap for the modern worker. Writer Derek Thompson made this brilliant observation. If the operating equipment of the 21st century is a smartphone or a laptop, then the modern factory isn't a physical brick-and-mortar building anymore. The factory is the day itself. Because your devices are totally portable, you can theoretically be just as productive at midnight sitting on your couch as you are at 2 p.m. at your desk. You're thinking about work during your commute, while you're cooking dinner, and when you wake up in a cold sweat at 3 a.m. You might technically be on the clock for fewer hours than a 1950s factory worker, but because your tool is inside your head, it feels like this endless, invisible factory shift. We've lost the boundaries, and we've lost control of our time.
Let's wrap things up with Section 5, Lessons from the End, Wisdom from 1,000 Elderly Americans. A gerontologist named Carl Pillemer interviewed 1,000 elderly Americans for his book, 30 Lessons for Living. He wanted to know what decades of life experience had taught them about true happiness. And guys, the results are just staggering. Out of 1,000 people looking back at the end of their lives, not a single person said that to be happy, you should work as hard as you can to buy things. 0 people said it's important to be wealthier than your neighbors. 0 people out of 1,000 said you should choose your career based on your future earning power. I mean, let that sink in for a second. The exact things our modern society obsesses over every single day were valued by exactly 0% of these elders.
So, what did they actually care about? It was entirely rooted in human connection and autonomy. They valued quality friendships. They valued being part of a community or some cause bigger than themselves. And they deeply, deeply valued having unstructured free time to just hang out with their children and loved ones. True success, validated by literally thousands of years of combined human life experience, is having the freedom to spend your time with the people who matter most to you.
Which brings us to this incredibly powerful quote from Carl Pillimer's research. Your kids don't want your money or what your money buys anywhere near as much as they want you. Specifically, they want you with them. Ultimately, it all loops right back to what we established at the very beginning with Angus Campbell's psychology research. Controlling your time is absolutely the highest dividend money will ever pay you.
And that leaves us with one final, absolutely vital question to ask ourselves as we close out this explainer. Look at your own life, your own career, and your own bank account. Are you using your money to buy things, constantly trading away your freedom for more stuff that won't actually make you happy? Or are you using your money to buy back your time? Think carefully about your answer, because honestly, it's going to define the wealth and the joy of the rest of your life. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and as always, keep learning.